We've walked through the plains of water. We've poked at the ones from the air and delved into the ones of fire. Oh, besides the fact that the Earth one isn't part of the Bestiary one, it was added later on to fully round out the four elemental situation going for. We move into our good friends, the Janni. Probably the most common, typical ones you'd think of when it comes to genie kind in general, besides the wind elemental ones. They are heavily implied to live majority of the time on the elemental outside of the elemental planes, hanging out in the material planes as such. Seeing as they're not exactly the most reliable sources to keep elemental planes in existence. They do share, in some regards, connections to all four elements. Unfortunately, the trade-off for having said power of combining it, ignoring the fact that they are the original states that they lived in, they unfortunately share too many traits similar to humans. While not being completely human, they do share quite a bit of our similarities. Unfortunately, because of that fact, even humans find them oddly jarring. They mostly exist as being, I guess, native. They're native to deserts a lot. They're nomadic in nature, and they share, well, pretty much you'd see one and think it's a human, if not for the fact that they have this air of mystery and magic flowing through them. Which is odd to say, considering Gloria leads a lot of the world to be very heavily magical. So it's kind of odd to describe them as creatures who are oddly mystical when elemental kins and half-breeds run rampant all over the world. But who knows? As for combat stats, they are by far the weakest, only making up the CR4 in their non-noble state, and being only medium, so they are very heavily looking human. They still own quite a few features that humans don't normally have that makes it very obvious. Usually glowing eyes, flowing hairs of mystical colors. I mean, elves weren't running on that same distance too, but they mostly live in the deserts of Kalesh. They do have, like every other genie kind, a, I guess, child-human mixture, but unlike the other elementals, where they are pretty much their own kin, Janni and their children with human races and humanoid races are called half Johnnies for the most part. They do get called Suli depending on some of the regions you live in, but they're pretty much just half Janni. And sharing, for some reason, unlike the air elementals once again, they do have the capability to change shape. It is significantly weaker than it, seeing as they can only change this twice a day, as per enlarged person or reduced person. So, featurette, they still once again are allowed to size shift up and down, which is helpful. On top of that, then you move on to their actual dilemma. They have the capabilities to transfer themselves, like mini genie kind, to other planes. Unfortunately, unlike their more native kin, they are limited on the amount of hours they can spend in there. Seeing as how 2 days is their built-in limit of tolerance. Once the lovely built-in tolerance kicks off, they slowly become drained of health, ticking down hourly until they finally croak. Although I'm not really sure how that works, considering they're native to the material plane. So I guess in that case they do, but planar stuff is always fun. Either way, they do eventually get punished for bothering to stay in planes in one of the elemental planes. As relationship wise, hanging out on the earth and air plane, they do fine. Because dealing with those, the, what are they? Well, I guess the top of my brain's not working. I just know that they're fairly friendly to the air and earth. It's when it comes to the fire and the water that you start looking at and going, yeah, this is a problem. Seeing as how the water ones are fairly annoying to most of the genie kind, it's not surprising. When you get a race that's mostly flippant and flows by its own pace, you kind of get annoyed with them. However, their truly hatred is the Ifritis, for they enslave, barter them off, capture, do whatever with them. Not necessarily the choice thing that they want to do, as they are particularly good at crafting items and creating stuff and fitting in with humans for the most part. Yeah, they unfortunately get to fall under the they don't like being around Afridi who want to make use of them. But Afridi are on that level of tolerance. As for their natural spell-like abilities, as pretty much all the genie kind, they have their invisibility and plane shifting. And they own probably the weakest amount of spells per day anyways, being allowed to create food and water, which is common for everything besides the Ifriti, since they are fairly friendly to pretty much any travelers. And they are able to ethereal jaunt, which I'm not really sure why it's a concerning feature for them, but I guess the spiritual journey is an option for them, and I'm sure they have some long dead ancestor to hang out and talk to. And of course, they always have their nobility state, which is kind of interesting because they're described as having wish making capabilities, but not any of their abilities allow this. They do get a significant buff into stats in their strength and intelligence once they become the few percent that are nobles, and gain a couple more spell-like abilities for augury, detect magic, and divination, which kind of sucks because detect magic's not really particularly good as a limited use thing, but it's all working in favor for them. And of course, because they are built to travel and essentially imitate most nomadic races, augury and divination helps them try and at least predict dangers and destinations beforehand, so it works out in the end. But at the same time, they don't have any wish granting by default. So when you run into one granting wishes, it's gonna be a fairly unique circumstance to run into. Other than that, they are essentially the embodiment of all elemental effects, and at the same time, the bane to deal with elemental effects, since they can't actually live long-term value on actual other planes. But either way, they are one of the few times where you will see multi-elementals capabilities from them, whether they specialize into their own uniqueness to it or invest into it. Bloodline magic with them and bloodline magic with Sulis, they vary in power and distinguishability for the most part. They have quite a few mobilities, but they're not amazing. They got basic attacks from weaponry because they're no natural attack capabilities. And other than that, you're bound to never really run into one unless they are real whimsical or you have some really good luck. But overall, if you run into a genie, not everyone will grant your wish, and the ones that do can vary in how well that'll work for you. But for now, bye bye!